While helping a neighbor move a couch, I opened the back door. She was there, on top of his son, in broad daylight. I hadn't planned on spending my Saturday hauling a neighbor's couch, but that's how things started. Mr. Caldwell had flagged me down the day before, explaining that his son was too busy to help move furniture and he didn't want to strain his back. I liked the old man. He was formal, a little stiff, the kind of neighbor who always trimmed his lawn edges twice, but he was respectful and carried himself like someone who wanted order in his world. So I said yes. When I walked into his house that afternoon, I noticed how quiet it was inside. Not the kind of quiet that comes from peace, but the kind that feels heavy, like a church right before a sermon. Family photos lined the walls. Mr. Caldwell with his wife years back, Brent in his high school football uniform, the whole family dressed sharp for Easter service. You didn't even need to be told this man was religious. You could see it in every detail of the home. We wrestled with the couch in the living room. It was a beast, one of those oversized sectional pieces with wooden legs that caught on everything. We had to tilt it, shuffle sideways, then tilt again. Sweat ran down my back as I pressed my shoulder into the armrest, pushing while Mr. Caldwell pulled. The thing barely budged. Back door might give us more space, he muttered, adjusting his grip. His voice carried that low rumble of command, like he'd spent his life telling people how to do things and expected obedience. I didn't argue. I turned, wedged my shoulder harder under the weight, and reached for the handle of the back door. It creaked open, sunlight spilling across the tiled floor. And then my stomach dropped. Because there, in broad daylight, in the middle of Mr. Caldwell's neatly fenced yard, my girlfriend Leah was straddling his son Brent like it was the most natural thing in the world. I froze, still bent under the weight of the couch, my hand gripping the doorframe. Her hair swung as she moved, her face flushed, her eyes closed. Brent had that smug grin plastered across his face, one hand behind his head like he owned the moment. My entire chest burned, the sound of my own heartbeat louder than the scrape of furniture. Mr. Caldwell was still pulling at his end, not yet seeing what I saw. I dropped my grip on the couch, letting my side crash to the floor with a dull thud. He grumbled something about careful handling, then stepped toward the door to see why I'd stopped. The instant his eyes landed on them, his whole body stiffened. For a moment, he looked carved from stone, his jaw set, his hands trembling as if he wasn't sure whether to cover his face or clench his fists. His son, his own yard, the girl his neighbor had been with for nearly 3 years. Leah gasped when she realized the door was open. She scrambled off Brent, tugging down her skirt in a panic, her face cycling between guilt and fear. Brent, on the other hand, just sat up with that arrogant tilt of his chin, squinting at us like we were intruding on his private moment. The silence cracked when my own voice came out louder than I intended. What the hell is this? My shout echoed through the yard. A dog barked somewhere down the street. A curtain twitched in the neighbor's window. Leah opened her mouth, stammered something incoherent, then shut it again, her hands still tugging nervously at her clothes. Brent smirked, actually smirked, and leaned back on his elbows like I was just another inconvenience. Mr. Caldwell's face turned red. He didn't yell right away, which somehow made it worse. He inhaled sharply, fists trembling, then turned his gaze on Brent with the weight of a judge delivering sentence. "You dare," he said, his voice low, shaking with restrained fury. "You dare bring this shame into my house, in my yard, in front of my guest." That was when the shouting truly began. Leah tried to step toward me, babbling excuses, but I shoved her back without touching her, just a forceful wave of my arm. I couldn't even process words properly, just raw betrayal boiling up into rage. I turned on Brent, who stood lazily, brushing grass from his jeans. He didn't look ashamed. If anything, he looked amused, like this wasn't the first time, like it wouldn't be the last. I lunged forward, grabbing him by the shirt front and slamming him against the wooden fence. His smirk finally faltered when his head thudded against the slats. "You think this is funny?" I snarled, my breath hot against his face. "You think I'm some kind of joke to you?" Brent shoved me back, and for a second it looked like fists would fly. But Mr. Caldwell stepped between us with surprising speed for a man his age, his arms outstretched like he was separating wild animals. His eyes were fixed on Brent, though not me. "You bring disgrace under my roof again, and you will no longer be welcome here," he spat. His words came with a weight that told me this wasn't the first time Brent had crossed him. His tone wasn't shock, it was exhaustion, the sound of a man who had defended his son too many times already. Leah sobbed, reaching for me again, but I turned and shoved open the gate. I couldn't stand another second of the sight. My vision blurred with fury as I stormed out onto the street. Behind me, the shouting continued, Mr. Caldwell's voice roaring in righteous indignation, Leah crying, Brent muttering something defiant. As I walked down the block, Neighbors peeked through blinds. They had heard. They had seen. The scandal wasn't going to stay confined to that backyard. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I didn't even need to check. Leah, no doubt, already spinning her lies, desperate to explain. I ignored it. My mind wasn't on her words. It was on Brent's face. That smug, fearless smirk. The way he looked at me like I was nothing. The way his own father's anger barely dented his arrogance. And deeper still, my mind stuck on Mr. Caldwell's words. Again, this wasn't just about me. This wasn't just a betrayal between lovers. This was a family rot, one that had been festering behind those neatly trimmed hedges and polished windows for years. Leah was just another symptom. Brent had been dragging his father's name through the mud long before I came into the picture. And in that moment, walking away with my fists still clenched, I realized something chilling. This wasn't over. Not even close. Leah thought she had broken me. Brent thought he had humiliated me. But I had just stumbled into a story much bigger than their little backyard affair. A story of control, reputation, and a son who seemed intent on destroying everything his father had built. I didn't know how yet, but I wasn't just going to walk away. I didn't answer Leah's first call, or her second, or the string of them that followed in the next hour. By the time I reached my apartment, the screen was lit up with her name, the call log like a broken record, each ring an attempt to rewrite what I'd seen with my own eyes. I left the phone buzzing on the counter. I poured myself a glass of water, my hands still trembling. Every time I shut my eyes, I saw Brent's smirk. Not Leah's face, though that cut deeper than I wanted to admit, but Brent's casual arrogance, as if humiliating me in broad daylight was entertainment. The first knock on my door came 15 minutes later. I ignored it. The second one, harder, louder, was followed by her voice. "Damien, please. Just let me in." Neighbors would hear. That was her tactic. Public performance, banking on my politeness, on my reluctance to let everyone see me as the man who refused his own girlfriend entry. I clenched my fists. I wasn't going to give her that power. The pounding continued, mixed with her muffled pleas, until finally I wrenched open the door. She stumbled in, mascara smudged, hair a mess, her hands reaching for me like contact alone could erase betrayal. "It wasn't what it looked like," she blurted. The line was so tired, so insulting, I laughed bitterly. In broad daylight, my voice came out colder than I expected. On the grass of the man whose couch I was carrying, she broke down, sobbing, spinning words about mistakes, pressure, confusion. I let her talk until the performance began to bore me. Then I pointed to the door. "You're not welcome here anymore." The shock on her face was almost comical. She had expected shouting, maybe even violence, but not calm dismissal. Not me stripping away her stage. I guided her back into the hallway and shut the door behind her. For the next hour, I listened to her cry, plead, threaten, then finally stomp away. When silence returned, it was almost worse. Because silence meant the storm was brewing elsewhere. And I was right. By Sunday, whispers had started. I went out to grab groceries, and two women paused their conversation as I walked past. They pretended to study fruit, but I caught snippets. Leah, backyard. Brent Caldwell. The gossip wasn't just about me being cheated on. It was about the Caldwells. Everyone knew Mr. Caldwell's standing in the church, his reputation for stern morality. His son caught fooling around with his neighbor's girlfriend in broad daylight wasn't just a scandal. It was humiliation for the whole family. Mr. Caldwell himself avoided me the next time we crossed paths. He nodded stiffly from his porch, but didn't speak. His eyes, though, were dark, burdened. He was a man struggling to keep his world from collapsing under whispers he couldn't control. But Brent thrived on it. I heard from a friend who worked at the local bar that Brent had been in over the weekend, boasting, loud enough that patrons turned their heads. He'd laughed about me. Damien caught me with his girl and couldn't handle it. He painted himself as the conqueror, me as the fool. That was when something shifted inside me. Until then, I had thought of Leah as the heart of the betrayal. But hearing Brent twist the knife publicly, I realized she was almost incidental. A pawn. He had humiliated me not because he loved her, but because he wanted to prove he could take what was mine, flaunt it, and laugh while doing so. Leah, for her part, tried to claw her way back. She sent long messages, paragraphs of apologies, claiming Brent had pressured her, claiming she didn't know what she was doing. But her tone changed when she realized I wasn't taking the bait. By midweek, her pleas turned into threats. If I didn't forgive her, she'd make sure everyone knew my secrets. The trouble was, I didn't have any worth exploiting. She was flailing, desperate to salvage something, anything. And I wasn't even angry anymore. I was calculating. On Thursday evening, I drove past the Caldwell house. Brent's car wasn't there, but Mr. Caldwell's old sedan was parked neatly in the driveway. I pulled over, pretending to check something on my phone, and watched as Mr. Caldwell walked down the path to fetch his mail. His movements were slow, deliberate, as if every step carried the weight of shame. When he spotted me, his shoulders stiffened. For a moment I thought he'd ignore me, but then he walked over. "Damien," he said, his voice low, stripped of its usual authority. "Mr. Caldwell." Silence stretched between us. Finally, he exhaled. "I am ashamed. Not for you. For him." His gaze dropped to the ground. I raised my son to respect boundaries, to honor what is not his. And yet, his jaw tightened. This is not the first time he has embarrassed me, but this is the worst. The words confirmed what I had suspected. Brent's arrogance wasn't new. It was a pattern, and his father, for all his sternness, had been covering for him, hoping discipline would someday take root. "He doesn't even care," I said quietly. Mr. Caldwell's eyes flashed. "That is what burns me most." His fists clenched, veins rising. "He feels no shame. He laughs. He mocks. And people look at me, as if my household is a circus." I nodded slowly. The cracks in the family's foundation weren't just showing. They were splitting wide open, and I knew exactly where to press. By Friday, the gossip had grown teeth. Someone at the church had spotted Leah leaving Brent's car late at night. Someone else claimed they'd seen her shopping with him. Whether the stories were true or exaggerated didn't matter. The narrative had taken hold. Brent Caldwell had stolen his neighbor's girlfriend and flaunted it without remorse. Mr. Caldwell's reputation, built on decades of sermons about morality, discipline, and respect, was unraveling. And the irony was brutal. His son wasn't just destroying his own name. He was dragging his father's with him. Brent, meanwhile, acted untouchable. He strutted around town, his arrogance now fueled by infamy. To him, the scandal was power. Every whisper, every sideways glance, fed his ego. For me, the humiliation had settled into a sharp, focused determination. They thought I'd retreat quietly. They thought my silence meant defeat. But silence was planning. Silence was strategy. I began sketching the outlines of what needed to happen. Not just revenge on Leah, not just retaliation against Brent, but something bigger. Something that would hit where it hurt most. Reputation, respect, legacy. Because Leah's betrayal had cut deep. But Brent's smirk, his mockery, had carved something even deeper. A certainty that he believed he was untouchable. And no one is untouchable. The weekend came, and with it, another escalation. Brent hosted a gathering at a friend's house. A backyard full of beer cans and loud music. Word spread quickly, as it always did. I wasn't there, but reports filtered back to me. Brent had stood in the middle of the crowd, raising his glass, and toasted to taking what the weak can't hold on to. Laughter roared. And then, according to one witness, he mentioned my name. That was the final straw. Leah, apparently, had been there too. Not embarrassed, not hiding, but laughing along, clinging to his arm like she hadn't been the one crying outside my apartment days before. It wasn't just betrayal anymore. It was theater, a performance at my expense. And if they wanted theater, I was ready to give them a show they would never forget. That night, I drove again past the Caldwell house. The lights were off, but I sat in my car and studied the silhouette of the building. The family photos on the walls, the polished exterior, the image of stability and morality. All of it was fragile, a thin shell over a rotting core. Mr. Caldwell, for all his sternness, still believed his son could be corrected, reined in, brought back into the fold. He was wrong. Brent didn't fear shame, because he had never truly been forced to face it. His father's protection had always cushioned the consequences. So I made a quiet promise to myself as I sat in that car, the cool night air seeping in through the cracked window. If Brent wanted to treat my humiliation like a game, I would turn the board on him. And this time, no fatherly hand would shield him. This wasn't going to end with shouting matches or slammed doors. It was going to end with Brent exposed in a way he couldn't laugh off. And Leah, by choosing his side, would go down with him. The pieces were already moving. I just had to guide them into place. The following week passed with an eerie rhythm. Leah's attempts to contact me had dwindled into silence, but not because she'd given up. I knew her silence meant she was clinging tighter to Brent, doubling down on the choice she'd made. Brent, meanwhile, only grew louder, feeding on the whispers like gasoline on a fire. But the louder he became, the more fragile Mr. Caldwell's facade of respectability grew. I could see it in the man's posture when he left for church, in the way he avoided eye contact with neighbors, in the sharp lines of his jaw that spoke of sleepless nights. He was a man who believed order was everything, and his son had turned his household into a circus. That was when the invitation came. It wasn't from Brent. It wasn't from Leah. It was from Mr. Caldwell himself. He appeared at my door late one evening, his hand gripping the brim of his hat like he was holding his composure together with cloth and thread. "I'm hosting a gathering this weekend," he said. His voice was brittle, carrying both shame and defiance. For Brent's birthday, I would like you to come. I blinked. You want me there? I want witnesses, he said quietly, his eyes locking with mine. If he embarrasses me again, I won't cover for him. There it was. The crack had become a fissure. Mr. Caldwell wasn't inviting me as a friend. He was inviting me as insurance. He needed someone who wouldn't flinch if the truth came out. I nodded slowly. I'll be there. The day of the party arrived with heavy clouds overhead, the air thick with the smell of impending rain. The Caldwell yard was decorated with string lights and a long table laid with food. Guests gathered, relatives, church acquaintances, family friends. They spoke in polite tones, but underneath every conversation was the hum of gossip. Everyone had heard something. Everyone was watching. Brent played host with the charisma of someone who thought he was invincible. He slapped backs, poured drinks, laughed too loudly at his own jokes. Leah hovered near him, smiling too brightly, as though her presence by his side could rewrite the past. I kept my distance at first, standing with a small cluster of neighbors, sipping soda and pretending to be neutral. But I watched. Every smirk, every gesture, every subtle glance between Brent and Leah. They couldn't help themselves. The thrill of risk was their addiction. Mr. Caldwell moved stiffly among the guests, his face carved into stern hospitality, but his eyes flicked to Brent constantly. He was a man daring his son to test him one last time, and I intended to make sure that test came. It started small. I approached Leah while she refilled her plate, my expression unreadable. She froze, the color draining from her face. Damien, she whispered, glancing around nervously. Please, not here. I leaned closer, my voice low. Don't worry. I'm just here to celebrate. Unless you give me a reason not to. Her hands trembled. The fork clattered against her plate. She mumbled something and hurried back to Brent's side. He noticed, of course. Brent thrived on confrontation. He smirked across the yard at me, then whispered something in Leah's ear that made her laugh nervously. The game had begun. An hour in, the party was in full swing. Music played softly, guests chatted, children darted around the yard. But tension thickened the air like static before a storm. Brent drank too much, his laughter carrying over the crowd. He strutted, leaning against the fence, gesturing broadly as he told some exaggerated story to his friends. I moved closer, pretending to mingle. I let my comments slip casually into conversations, little sparks of suggestion. Funny how some people never learn respect. Reputation's fragile, isn't it? One wrong move, and it's gone. Some hosts forget whose roof they're under. I didn't have to point fingers. The whispers carried themselves. Heads turned toward Brent, toward Leah. And Brent, drunk on arrogance, only fed the fire. It was inevitable. At some point, he tugged Leah's hand and whispered something to her. She glanced around nervously, then followed him toward the house. They thought they were subtle. They weren't. I waited a few moments, then approached Mr. Caldwell. You might want to check inside, I said softly. His eyes narrowed, suspicion warring with dread. He moved past me, his shoulders tense, and disappeared into the house. I followed. The hallway was dim, the muffled hum of party chatter behind us. Mr. Caldwell's footsteps echoed against the wooden floor. We reached Brent's room at the end, the door slightly ajar. And there it was. Again, Leah, perched on Brent's lap, her hands clutching his shirt. Brent, smirking, his voice low and mocking. They hadn't even bothered to lock the door. Mr. Caldwell froze. His face contorted with fury, shame, disbelief, but not surprise. This was the moment he had feared, the proof he could no longer deny. He shoved the door open with such force it slammed against the wall. The crash startled Leah, who stumbled off Brent, her face pale. Brent looked up, his smirk faltering for the first time. In my house, Mr. Caldwell thundered. His voice shook the walls. Under my roof. With the same shameless arrogance as before. Guests began to gather behind us, drawn by the noise. Heads peered around the corner, whispers rippling. And then the room was full. Cousins, neighbors, church friends. All staring, their eyes wide, their mouths open. The silence that followed was suffocating. Leah tried to speak, but her words dissolved into sobs. Brent stood, his fists clenched, but his bravado cracked under the weight of so many eyes. Mr. Caldwell stepped forward, his finger trembling as he pointed at his son. You have disgraced this family for the last time. The words hung in the air like a verdict. The room erupted. Relatives gasped, some shaking their heads, others muttering prayers. Friends exchanged looks, their suspicions confirmed. A woman at the back whispered, in front of everyone, her tone dripping with disdain. Leah crumpled, covering her face with her hands. Brent tried to laugh it off, muttering something about privacy, but no one believed him. The smirk was gone, replaced by the twitching jaw of a man who realized too late that his safety net had vanished. Mr. Caldwell's voice cut through the chaos. Out, both of you, out of my house, out of my sight. Leah sobbed harder, begging, but Brent just stood frozen, his arrogance shattered. Finally, he shoved past the crowd and stormed into the night. Leah stumbled after him, humiliated, her sobs echoing down the hallway. The guests lingered, whispering, exchanging looks of pity for Mr. Caldwell, of disgust for Brent and Leah. The house that once symbolized order now stood as a monument to disgrace. And I stood at the back, silent, watching the scene I had orchestrated unfold. Not a word spoken, not a hand raised, but every move nudged carefully into place. Brent had wanted theater. He had it. But this time, the performance ended with his mask ripped away. When the crowd dispersed, Mr. Caldwell remained in the hallway, his shoulders slumped, his breathing heavy. For a moment, he looked older than I had ever seen him. Thank you, he whispered hoarsely, though his eyes never met mine. I nodded. Words weren't necessary, because we both knew this wasn't just about me anymore. It was about a father finally seeing the monster he had shielded too long, and a son realizing that arrogance cannot protect you when the curtain finally falls. That night, as I drove home, the image burned into my mind wasn't Leah crying or Brent storming out. It was the look on Mr. Caldwell's face, the moment he finally broke. And I knew part 3 wasn't the end. It was the fracture before the collapse. The real consequences were still to come. After that night, the Caldwell household was never the same. The string lights from Brent's birthday party were still dangling in the yard the next morning, but they looked like decorations left after a funeral. Mr. Caldwell's car sat motionless in the driveway, while Brent's truck was gone. The air around the neighborhood carried a strange silence, as if everyone was waiting to see what the old man would do next. The whispers, however, didn't wait. By Sunday, the entire congregation knew. Brent Caldwell and Leah, my Leah, had been caught in his room during his own birthday party, with half the church present to witness it. The whispers weren't whispers anymore. They were discussions in daylight, traded openly in the pews, muttered after sermons, dissected over Sunday lunches. For a man like Mr. Caldwell, whose entire life was built on reputation, discipline, and religious authority, it was a public crucifixion. And unlike the quiet mistakes of his son's past, bar fights, drunk driving, whispered affairs with girls who eventually left town, this one couldn't be covered up. Too many witnesses. Too many mouths ready to repeat it. I watched it unfold from a distance. And I'll admit, there was satisfaction in it. Not joy, not relief. Just the grim satisfaction of seeing arrogance meet its own end. Leah's collapse came quickly. She showed up at my apartment again 3 days later, her face pale, her eyes bloodshot. Gone was the carefully painted mask of charm she wore at the party. Now she looked desperate, stripped bare. Damien, she begged through the crack in the door. Please, just listen. He's turned on me. Brent's not who I thought he was. He won't answer my calls. He told me to leave him alone. I leaned against the doorframe, studying her. For the first time, I realized she wasn't even humiliated by what she'd done. She was humiliated by being abandoned. You made your choice, I said evenly. Tears spilled down her face. She tried to step closer, but I blocked her path. She wasn't welcome anymore, not here, not in my life. She had gambled on Brent's arrogance and lost. That was the last time I saw her at my door. Brent, however, didn't go quietly. For a week, he swaggered through town, pretending nothing had changed. He laughed with friends, claimed the scandal was exaggerated, painted himself as the victim of gossip. But arrogance is a fragile armor, and it cracks under pressure. His father stopped speaking to him entirely. He was locked out of the house. Rumors spread that his father had threatened to cut him out of his will if he didn't clean up his life. Then came the fight. I wasn't there, but I heard about it from 3 different people. Brent had shown up at a bar, drunk and belligerent, mouthing off about me. He called me weak, called me pathetic, claimed Leah had begged for him. A man who barely knew me finally snapped and told him to shut his mouth. Brent threw the first punch. He lost. He walked out of that bar with a black eye, blood on his shirt, and not a single friend left on his side. For the first time, the smirk was gone. Mr. Caldwell, meanwhile, doubled down on his righteousness. At church the following Sunday, he stood in front of the congregation and made a speech that sent chills through the pews. My son has brought shame to my household, he said, his voice heavy but steady. And as his father, I will not cover his sins any longer. Discipline has failed. Protection has failed. If he continues down this road, he will walk it alone. The room was silent when he finished. It wasn't just a condemnation. It was a public cutting off, a declaration that Brent no longer carried the protection of his father's name. For a man like Mr. Caldwell, it was the ultimate punishment. For Brent, it was exile. Leah drifted in the weeks that followed. She tried to cling to Brent, but he shoved her away. She tried to rebuild with friends, but none of them wanted to be pulled into the wreckage. Eventually, word spread that she'd lost her job at a boutique downtown. The owner had heard enough gossip to decide Leah wasn't the image she wanted representing her store. She became a ghost in the neighborhood, spotted at odd hours, slipping between buses, her head down. Every time her name came up in conversation, it was met with a sigh, a shake of the head, a muttered, "Such a waste." Brent fared no better. Without his father's support, he drifted from couch to couch, his arrogance curdling into bitterness. He started showing up at the same bars, but no one laughed at his stories anymore. He was a punchline now, not the star of the show. The confrontation came a month later. I was walking home from work when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned to see Brent, his face drawn, his eyes bloodshot, his fists clenched. "You think you ruined me?" he snarled. I didn't answer. I just kept walking. He lunged forward, shoving me against the fence of someone's yard. His breath stank of whiskey, his hands shaking. He raised a fist, but his swing was sloppy, fueled by rage and alcohol. I stepped aside, and he stumbled, crashing to the ground. Neighbors peeked out from their porches. I didn't move to help him. I didn't need to. Within minutes, a patrol car pulled up. Someone had called. The officers recognized him instantly. Brent Caldwell, drunk, disorderly, swinging at neighbors. They hauled him up by his arms, cuffed him, shoved him into the back of the car. One of the officers glanced at me. "Thanks for staying calm." I just nodded. Brent screamed obscenities as they drove away, his voice cracking with desperation. But all I felt was silence. Mr. Caldwell never spoke his son's name again. I saw him a few times afterward, walking to church alone, his back straighter than ever. There was sadness in his eyes, yes, but also relief. As if finally, after years of covering for Brent, he had laid down a burden too heavy to bear. Leah eventually left town. I don't know where she went. Maybe she thought she could outrun the whispers, start over somewhere people didn't know her face. Brent stayed, but only physically. He became a shadow, drifting between dead-end jobs, sleeping in cheap motels, his arrogance ground down into resentment. He avoided me on the street. His smirk never returned. And me? I didn't chase revenge any further. I didn't need to. Revenge isn't about destruction, it's about balance. And balance had been restored. Leah had betrayed me, and she had paid. Brent had mocked me, and he had fallen. Mr. Caldwell had faced the truth of his son, and he had finally broken the cycle of protection that let arrogance thrive. I wasn't a hero. I wasn't even victorious in the traditional sense. I had lost someone I once trusted. But I walked away with something better, clarity. Clarity that arrogance destroys itself. Clarity that silence can be sharper than shouting. Clarity that sometimes the most powerful revenge is simply stepping back and letting people choke on the mess they made. Months later, I drove past the Caldwell house. The lawn was still neatly trimmed, the porch swept clean, the lights glowing softly in the windows. But it looked quieter than before, emptier. At the corner, outside a cheap motel, I spotted Brent and Leah together. Or what was left of them. They were screaming at each other in the parking lot, their voices raw, their faces twisted. Brent's shirt was torn. Leah's mascara streaked down her cheeks. People passed by without looking, uninterested in two broken souls tearing at each other. I slowed for just a moment, watching them. Then I drove on. Because they weren't my concern anymore.